All right, we're excited about our next talk on privatization of the International Space Station. Joining me via a pre-recorded presentation is Clay Mowry, Chief Revenue Officer of Voyager Space, and Jeffrey Manber, President International and Space Station of Voyager Space and the Chairman of Nanoracks.
Hi, I'm Clay Mowry with Voyager Space Holdings. I'm here with Jeffrey Manber, also of Voyager. It's great to be here speaking with you at the Astor Perkins quarterly meeting. We're here to have a little bit of conversation about commercial space, how we got to where we are today. My background started in the government, then I worked for a trade association, worked for 15 years as the president of Ariane Space Incorporated, a commercial launch company based in Europe. I ran the U.S. subsidiary. Past 5.5 years, I was with Blue Origin, and now Chief Revenue Officer at Voyager. I'm really excited to be here with you, Jeff. Talk a little bit about the history of where we started, what we've got going on. I started this, more than 25 years ago, working in the commercial space sector and seen a huge evolution over that period of time, starting with commercial launches. We really were focused at that point in time on the geostationary communication satellite business, launching those satellites into space, very much financed in a way that you had very predictable outcomes. Satellites that were up in space for 15 years or longer, providing very solid returns for what was a very capital intensive business to build and launch over time. Now we're talking about building and launching private space stations, a really incredible time. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your beginnings of where you started in the business.
And it's about time, I've been waiting. Okay, so I'm Jeff Manber, as Clay said, and I've been working over 30 years in the industry, principally on the human side. While Clay was working on the comm and launch vehicles, I've been working on the space stations. And it's hard for people to understand the maturity that we've seen in the ecosystem in the last decade and a half. When I got going, I was working for what was Shearson Lehman American Express, and I helped create the first space fund on Wall Street. We raised $10 million, and it was really groundbreaking because up to that time, private capital would not flow into private companies. It just didn't exist. And we can go into some of the reasons for that in the ecosystem, but let me just quickly give my background. It was not only Wall Street. I helped set up the Office of Space Commerce in the last year of the Reagan administration, which was the first time you had a policy shop in the American government, which was not based at NASA. And really the progression that we've seen, before we start talking about capital and the needs today, the progression that we've seen the last 30 years is moving away from the monopoly that NASA's had on developing, owning, and operating our space systems. That's not the way we do things in this country. Has no room for private capital, no room for ecosystem, no room for competition. And I remember when NASA was competing against you at Arianespace, when the shuttle was competing on launching satellites, which is totally wrong. So I worked in the last year of the Reagan administration, helped set up the Office of Space Commerce, then worked at Shearson Lehman American Express on the Space Fund. And after that, I began working, in fact, only American to work for the Russian manned space program, in privatizing a lot of the Russian assets to help set up the International Space Station. And I was on the other side from you. I was working ILS to get the Russians involved in the launch vehicle market, and you were working on the American government side.
Yeah, so at the time we were trying to put some trade agreements in place that actually opened up access to foreign launch systems for US-built satellites, which was quite revolutionary at the time to launch on Russian vehicles and Ukrainian vehicles back in the day, which really opened up a lot of capability, access to space capability for satellite companies. But at that time, more than 90% of what we would call commercial space was geostationary telecommunication satellites. That really dominated the sector. Then we saw the evolution of Earth observation platforms, and now we've got a lot of companies in the sector that are doing Earth observation, now hyperspectral, and then the evolution to private space stations, which is really something that's amazing, but I think at its core, driven over the last 10 years by NASA. So NASA really has come a long way in what we now say is buying space as a service. At the time, back when they started the Commercial Orbital Transportation, a COTS program, and then that evolved into the Commercial Resupply Program, this is delivering cargo in US-built space systems on US-built rockets to the International Space Station. This was a revolutionary idea. that private sector could own, operate these kind of systems, that NASA would buy this space as a service, cargo services, and ultimately crewed services. And really this has been a ground changing, ground shifting in what the government is doing in terms of buying that kind of commercial capability.
Yeah, to sort of sum up this phase that Clay's talking about, it's really government as customer. And Clay's right that NASA has been driving this to get us, and I know we're going to talk about destinations, which is dear to me, but it was really led by DOD. Would you agree? I mean, DOD in the 80s and early 90s said, you know what, we don't have to build our satellites anymore. We can turn to the commercial sector to build communication satellites, even though we're going to use them as a US government, we're going to use the transponders. The private sector is capable of doing this. And that began the shift where we began to see the need for private launch services. We began to see the government behaving as a customer. Suddenly, DOD wanted the lowest cost for their for their satellite usage, and you began that competition. But then to sort of make, so what we're really talking about here is there were 10, 12 years in our career where we saw the transition, where we went from government completely dominated to government as customer, and that was on the launch vehicles, the satellites, and now, as Clay has been saying, after 10, 12 years of building up a robust space transportation, you all know Elon Musk, you know Bezos, and you probably know that there's probably 20, 30, 40 other space companies out there doing launch services. It's a classic new market. There'll be failures. There'll be winners. The winners will be huge. And now, after that time, we're now looking at something new, and that's the destinations. Private space station, it's an exciting new era. Do you want to touch on that?
Sure. So, commercially now, NASA let contracts at the end of last year to 3 companies to design and ultimately build privately owned and operated space stations. And they've said they're excited about buying access aboard those stations for a couple of astronauts continually in 6-month stays, so where they would be up in orbit doing research, science, working with international partners aboard those space stations. And it's a super exciting time to watch NASA now go to get out of that business, be able to focus more on moving up to the moon and Mars on the big, harder things to do, and turning over LEO, low Earth orbit, to commercial operators to be able to do this. So it's a really amazing thing to watch that shift take place, and watch NASA step back and say, hey guys, we're not going to design or tell you exactly how to design. We're going to say, here's the things that we need to see on the space station to have that capability to do the science. We want the ability to have 4 crew members up there at any period of time, but 2 permanently in rotation. And then you guys have at it. You guys be able to design a space station in a very commercial approach, which is, by the way, going to lower the cost for NASA. They're not going to have to spend the kind of billions that they'll still be spending money to have that capability, but probably at about half the price.
And so what's the opportunity for you in the audience today? There's several areas you can look at this. You have the infrastructure development. Okay, you can participate as an investor in one of the companies. We know, of course, you'll choose Voyager for your investment platform, but you have a choice of several companies you can invest in now, and there's different reasons and advantages for each company, and that's wonderful. But then there's the in-space services that are going to come about, because as I look out the next 10 years, I think we'll have 4, 5, 6, 7 different US-owned private space stations. Some will be focused on hotels, some will be professional astronauts. At Voyager and our portfolio company Nanoracks, we're looking at dedicated to science, research, in-space manufacturing. We're fine on also getting into the tourism, maybe a second space station, and other needs for more and more space stations. So you can choose right now to not just get involved in launch vehicles. That's kind of, can we mix metaphors and say that vehicles left the station? I don't know. Okay, sorry. Okay, so and there's Earth observation with great folks who have been involved in that. There's algorithms, big data, and this is a new space market. It's a new market for infrastructure development, where also NASA's one customer of many. We see in-space manufacturing as becoming important for not only in-space needs, but on the ground with fiber optics and thin films. We see agricultural research. The core of our space station is the George Washington Carver Science Park. And it's because Carver was a great agricultural scientist, and we see that as a future. And so what we're seeing is a second chapter in this commercialization of space, where it's flipping to the destinations, infrastructure development, and it's where the government is still involved. This is still not purely commercial, but the government is one customer of many.
Yeah, I think it started with lowering the cost of access to space, basically increasing the opportunities to get to orbit. By the way, starting with suborbital. So I just actually had been working on the New Shepard program and opening access to astronauts like Dylan Taylor, our CEO and founder, to be able to go to space, and as well as many others. And it's amazing to me, Jeffrey, I've worked in this for decades, to see my friends and my colleagues actually going to space for the first time. I've got a half a dozen friends now that, I trained. I did. I trained back in April. I was on the dry run.
You're not too tall?
I'm not too tall. I could fit, but Michael Strahan flew to space. So Michael Strahan can go. I'm not too big. I think for him it was girth too. I would certainly.
I won't tell him you said that.
No. He's not a small guy. But to see those guys. So I trained in April just before Jeff and Mark Bezos flew with Wally Funk and this historic first flight with Oliver Damon, the youngest and the oldest astronauts to go to space. But we saw with Virgin, with Blue Origin, and now with the SpaceX missions that are sending private astronauts aboard, Inspiration and the other missions, to see this opening up of this transportation architecture that allows low-cost access to space. This is one of the key enablers for us to be able to build and launch a private space station in the end of 2027, where we'll have this capability to put people in orbit.
And I guess one kind of getting near the end here, one sort of concluding comment. I don't know if we're at the end, but I'm not a financial person, but I will say that the SPACs are good, and they're not good. And you in the financial community have to figure out how to work that. We've seen all these space companies go public via the SPAC method. There is ample room for private capital still in the pre-public markets, and you guys are the sophisticated ones, but we really see that there's going to be more and more of an acceleration of companies that have mature business plans, need additional capital, and whether, I'm not sure how many companies are going to go public over the next year, but the market for pre-public capital is very intense, and you know that 90% of the companies seeking capital are working in the same direction as the government. And so you know that this is in the interests of the United States. It's where we're going in infrastructure. There's commercial, there's strategic reasons, and so it's a very exciting, vibrant market.
Yeah, I think that's been the heart of Voyager's approach. When we look at the companies that we've put together within our portfolio of operating companies, is to look at companies that have mature technology, they have profitable businesses, they're in lines of service where we think there's potential for growth. And I think there's a huge amount of opportunity there going forward. We're really excited about that future. I'm excited to be a part of this Voyager adventure that we're on. And really looking forward to building out this private space station, the Starlab space station with Nanoracks.
If you could go back 12 years in almost any market, one of the best investments you could have done was invest in SpaceX 12, 13 years ago when they won a NASA contract. And Elon Musk has been brilliant, but he started off as a contractor, a NASA contract on this transformation. And that's where we are at Voyager today. And when you look 10, 12 years ahead, okay, so we're doing a pitch. We weren't going to do a pitch, but we're doing a pitch. When you look 10, 12 years ahead, you're going to say, gosh, I wish I had been involved in that whole infrastructure development. So it's a wonderful time. And, if you guys have any questions, reach out to us at Voyager. We'd be delighted to help you figure out your way to this exciting market.
Yeah, so, thanks, Jeff. That was great.
Yeah, this is great. We're going to do midnight commercials next. We're going to do, okay. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I think that was a terrific conversation between Jeffrey as well as Clay. And just as a commentary, is that I think they did a great job of providing an overview of really the privatization movement that started with NASA and the DoD. And the beneficiaries of that are not only the SpaceX, but really the stakeholders or ultimately the shareholders of that company. But that same is going to the cislunar economy, which we talked about in the prior panel, and now to private commercial space stations. So as these once government-held assets become privatized, that's really where the potential opportunities are, and I think it's going to be significant. I mean, we're talking huge, and I know that Jeffrey and Clay were referring to the NASA award that had granted about $426 million between Nanoracks, a Voyager space company, Blue Origin, and North Grumman. And the space station that they're referring to, Starlab, is going to be the first orbiting commercial space station, and that will be operational by 2027. And all of Starlab is going to be contained in one single launch from Earth. So unlike some of the other approaches where they're going to have multiple launches and then assemble in space, one launch and they're going to be almost immediately available for use. Now, this Starlab is an expandable facility. So basically, it kind of is shrunken, and then it kind of gets expanded to its full capacity, and has the payload capacity of ISS today, which is quite amazing. So that means that all the science research work can be done in this new Starlab facility, and it will also be able to handle up to 4 crew members on a continuous basis. The other thing that, just to reinforce again, because of the unique approach, is unlike the design of the International Space Station, the main structure of Starlabs will consist of a single large inflatable module instead of the traditional rigid structure. But still, this inflatable module has this thick skin that provides protection against radiation, as well as protection against micrometeorite and orbital debris, which is absolutely incredible if you need to stay up there for a long time and survive. Another big difference is that this is going to be equipped with a state-of-the-art robotic arm that will handle a lot of the outside work that typically would have been done by the astronauts, crew members, where they have to actually do risky spacewalks. So no longer that's the case. Basically, this robotic arm will handle much of the maintenance, external payloads, and the things that the humans would have had to done. So again, I want to thank Clay and Jeffrey for a terrific presentation. Again, I think they're great subject matter experts because they've been in this industry for decades. And certainly Jeffrey, having led Nanoracks and then now part of Voyager Space Holding, really understands both the past, present, and the future. He mentioned, the kind of returns had you invested early in SpaceX. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing as well from a VC perspective. So let's give them a round of applause. We're now going to transition to AI, robotics, and autonomy track to talk about off-road robotics and transportation. And that session will start at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.